Yeah, so welcome to Health and fucking hell.
Right, right.
I'm reading out the title as written.
Yeah, just read it as written, and then just your own little blurb. Right, we'll go again.
Do you want me to? Because the thing, you know what I did there?
What did you do?
I flicked on the Chrome, and I got that picture of the guy. So that's his name, and I just lost it. And he, one sec, I just need to
you need some time, man. You need some time. You take sort yourself out.
Oh, right, okay, right. I'm
that is it.
Lost it. Absolutely lost it. Right. Okay, so I'm doing Health, Fitness and Success, your guide to winning at everything fitness related.
Your intro, I'll do my intro, I'll talk over the structure briefly,
Yep.
And then we'll get into it. Right, so I'll just say Health and Fitness, episode 1, and then you take off.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, good?
Yep.
Yeah, Health and Fitness, episode 1.
Yeah, hi, my name's Ben. I've got a background originally in computation.
The title, Ben, the title of the podcast.
Fuck me. Fuck me. Fuck. You know what, this is sheer...
This is much harder than it looks.
This is hard, yeah. Normally I'm fine. When I'm on my own, I'm fine. It's literally...
This is the first time I've done it with someone, so be gentle.
Right, okay.
Hello, and welcome to Health, Fitness and Success, your bi-weekly guide to winning at everything. Hosted by Mark Keys and Ben Tormey. Episode 1. That's it, man.
So welcome to Health, Fitness and Success, your guide to winning at everything fitness related. My name's Ben Tormey. Originally I've got a background in mathematics, so that includes a bit of computation and physics. But now I'm involved in fitness. I try to apply the science aspect to training and diet to really meet the needs of clients to get results efficiently and quickly while fitting comfortably within their lifestyle. So it's about training people to fit their diet and around their lifestyle in a sustainable way that ensures they have long-term progress. And it's about building good habits.
Hi, my name is Mark. I come from a strength and conditioning and performance-based background. I myself am a powerlifter. I've competed at world championship level and have won a Commonwealth championship. I'm currently working within professional rugby within Edinburgh. I've also worked with the national side as well. My main background is in the strength aspect of the sport, but I also work heavily within speed, power, fitness, conditioning, and I also work fairly heavily within nutrition, within a performance remit. I'm coming from this as someone who has quite a wide background of reading, is interested in many aspects, and quite like spreading what I've learned to the general public. So this podcast is a vehicle for that, and also to collaborate with Ben, who I think is a very useful person. So the structure of the show will be, this is the first episode, so this is fairly loose. If you have any feedback, comments, emails, send them to us. We will have an email at some stage. Probably should have set that up before I started the show. Show structure is, we'll do a news section, which will last for 10 minutes. We'll go into a topic of the week, and this will be a bi-weekly podcast, so it'll be a topic of every bi-week. And then we will just finish up with question and answers. Obviously, without having any questions or answers, it'll be pretty limited this episode. And we will also have a what we're reading, a thinking section. Okay, so let's begin the news section.
Yeah, so the first thing I've been looking at this week in the news is just a study on fructose consumption. So I saw a post about this today, actually, and the full text is available if you want to read it yourself. But basically, this was looking at the comparison between sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. So when you actually dig into the study, it's randomized, double-blinded trial, and it was done on overweight and obese subjects between the ages of 25 and 60. So they were looking at the consequences of having sucrose or high fructose corn syrup at about 10 or 20% of your total calories as a component of the normal diet. So they were allowed to just to eat the way they normally would, but they were controlling for the percentage of calories coming from sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. And what they found really was that there's no real difference between these two things. Now, there's a lot of guys out there who've made a living from telling you that fructose is evil and that it makes you fat. But this study was done over 10 weeks, and it found that there wasn't any difference in the atherolipid risk factors, and certainly not in weight gain. So they found that just substituting isocalorically high fructose corn syrup didn't make a difference in terms of weight gain, which is, flying in the face of what everyone has been telling us for a while.
So I think just briefly on this topic, we won't try to spend too much time on these topics, but this is kind of indicative of what you'll get quite a lot within the health and fitness industry, and something you need to be aware of is you'll have people who are looking for sensationalist things or just try to stick out. So if they can demonize something, it's much easier to stick out rather than saying the status quo is the way forward. So this is kind of what you'll see within kind of the popular culture. We have if it fits your macros, which is basically just a calorie controlled diet, which of course you'll be hearing for years that calories in versus calories out is how weight loss works. And Ben?
Yeah, so the thing is, obviously, if it fits your macros, that unfortunately there's this sort of false dichotomy where you either exclusively live off Pop-Tarts and whey protein, or you only eat, gluten-free, sort of paleo-style foods. And the problem, I guess, is that when we talk about if it fits your macros, it's become quite a polarized topic, because people seem to approach it from either one of those two extremes, when really the whole point of it is about a kind of balance, So no one's suggesting that you eat a diet that's composed entirely of fructose based carbohydrates. Even taking it to extremes, you probably could get away with that for a short term diet. But I guess this study is just adding a little bit of weight to the kind of balanced approach to nutrition, which is saying food choices do matter, in terms of the big picture, but whether or not you're getting carbohydrate from fructose or sucrose or whatever, it doesn't actually matter so much, assuming that they're a relatively small percentage of your total calories, and you're not just eating a caloric surplus from, drinking 2-liter bottles of high fructose corn syrup based diet, sodas.
Like Coca-Cola, if they want to sponsor us, which is absolutely
our
delicious.
sponsors, Coca-Cola. I'd like to give a shout out to them, and
I've got a yacht
and Pop-Tarts.
Pop-Tart Fitness.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so that's enough on high fructose syrup. These things will kind of be recurring themes within this podcast, I feel. So we will be able to touch on it at a later date. So next up, we're going to talk about something that did happen quite a while ago. It's Kevin Ogar. If you follow, it was in the popular press, probably about 6 weeks ago now, or 7 weeks ago. Some guy called it Kevin Ogar from America, who was taking part in a snatch event in a CrossFit competition. He missed the weight backwards, and as he dropped the weight, it caught on a stack of 20s that were sitting behind him, 20 kilo discs, and it shot into his lumbar spine and ended up severing his spine, and the guy is now paralyzed from the waist down. So I think where we're going to go with this conversation is, first, obviously, sorry to Kevin. Hope your recovery goes as full as it can, and just would like to say that CrossFit kind of got demonized quite a lot in the press for this, but I don't think it was actually CrossFit's fault. It was probably more down to the way the competition space was laid out. And it kind of shows, in my opinion anyway, how when something happens like this, if it gets into the popular press, it'll be very quick to be demonized. Again, a common trend you'll see.
Yeah, so, I mean, from my perspective, the whole thing about that incident was that, you know, CrossFit actually came out, for me, quite positively, because the CrossFit community was there to support Kevin Ogar after a very serious accident. They raised money for him. And so, although, of course, the training side of things might be open to criticism, you know, there's certainly elements of CrossFit which I don't like, and that's as much to do with the way people approach it. It's not necessarily CrossFit itself, but it's, you know, a lot of the people who follow CrossFit, it's kind of what they choose to do, you know, their interpretation of it, rather like, you know, religious zealots in many ways. But no, Kevin Ogar, you know, that whole injury, and the response from the community showed that there is a hugely positive element, which is that element of community, the support he received. I think you'd be hard pressed to find that in any other sport, you know. So the way they sort of rallied together to help him through what is probably, you know, an incredibly challenging and, you know, harrowing experience, I think that's incredible. The actual training itself, I think there's certainly, like I said, criticisms that can be made, but I don't think CrossFit is all bad. Again, it's the same thing with, you know, diet. It's not either CrossFit is evil or it's great. There's something slightly, there's a nuance there, and there's certainly a debate to be had about how useful CrossFit is for certain people. I don't think.
Sorry to interrupt. I think the best thing you can say about CrossFit methodology is that the elite CrossFitters don't train CrossFit.
Yeah.
And that's all I really think you need to say on the topic. But yeah, certainly the CrossFit methodologies are something we can discuss at a later time and maybe as a topic of the week. But I'd certainly like to echo what you just said about the community. And I think it's something you struggle to find with quite a lot of like bodybuilding, health and fitness, and powerlifting, maybe strongman to a lesser degree, because it does have a fairly good community. But certainly powerlifting is like it's a sport where there's a lot of bitching, moaning that goes on. And I just think that CrossFit came across extremely well in that incident. And again, our thoughts go out to Kevin Ogar and his family.
Yeah, I mean, that was it's an awful accident. Of course, I think you can see that things go a little bit too far when people start saying, well, this is what happens when you do CrossFit. You end up, you know, seriously injured. I think that accident could have happened, you know, under a whole range of different circumstances, and really, you know, it wasn't.
People die every year in sports like rugby, boxing.
Exactly.
I mean, there's yet to be a fatality from CrossFit, so.
Yeah,
I think it certainly gets a lot of bad press for injury rates, when in fact, if you actually look at the epidemiological evidence, it actually has a lesser rate of injury than something like strongman.
Yeah, exactly. Well, strongman, you know, is actively putting you in situations like with, you know, a lot of the carrying events, and you know, the stones where your spine is not in a very safe position, so you can definitely argue that's a risk.
Anyone who's done strongman or strongman training will attest to that fact. Okay, so the next two topics are going to be on a fairly big topic in nutrition, and certainly one that makes a lot of money. And the first one, they're going to be both on antioxidants and reactive oxygen species. The first one is a meta-analysis. So when someone does, it's a systematic review. So when someone does a review of scientific literature, they can do a literature review, which is kind of a discussion through the topic where they'll search for all the relevant data, and they won't do any statistical analysis. They'll just kind of have a narrative of where the field began and where it is at currently. There's a meta-analysis where they will perform a statistical analysis based off cohorts of studies. And there's this thing called a systematic review where they will actually systematically try to go through all of the literature. So every relevant search engine, they will search for a study that's relevant to what they're searching for. So the study we're going to be talking about is produced by a body called the Cochrane Foundation. The Cochrane Foundation are based in medical sciences. And they perform systematic reviews on topics in medicine as a way of pushing the science forward and trying to get definitive answers. Because the best way to get a definitive answer in science is to perform something like a systematic analysis on where there's a large body of evidence. So the study in question is entitled Antioxidant Supplements for Prevention of Mortality in Healthy Participants and Patients with Various Diseases. Basically, they performed a systematic analysis on 26 trials that included 215,900 people, 52 trials that included 80,000 participants, and another set of trials that includes 112,000 participants. So in all, they had about 400 to 450,000 participants within their cohort. And what they found so they looked at all-cause mortality, so heart disease, stress, any kind of natural cause of death they looked at. They found that people who supplemented with antioxidants were in fact 4% more likely to die prematurely than when compared to controls. So I think we'll discuss the implications of that for your antioxidants. Ben, nutrition is your thing. Do you want to chip in?
Yeah. So in terms of the whole antioxidant supplementation thing, I mean, it's clear from the literature I've read that the picture isn't as simple as saying oxidation is bad. Obviously, it's not. In general, it's basically the degree of oxidation that is the issue. So when you've got things like reactive oxygen species, you can either say that they're bad or they're good, and there seems to be like a polarization. So either you'll just you'll say, okay, well I'll mega supplement with antioxidants to kill off as much R.O.S as possible, or you'll try and stress yourself out to an extreme, again with the idea that you're going to have some sort of adaptive response and therefore create beneficial adaptation. So the idea of hormesis comes into play there. So it turns out that neither of those approaches is really quite right, because it seems to be that you want a physiological level of R.O.S. So in other words, you need some formation of reactive oxygen species. So you need some sort of adaptive response. But if you push it too far and you have too much R.O.S., that's bad. And if you have too little, that's also bad. So it's kind of it's a weird situation that you're in, but essentially the take-home message is that you want to introduce a certain amount of eustress. So in other words, beneficial amounts of stress that produce a positive adaptation. So that can be dietary, so with caloric restriction. It can be with training, because weight training, exercise, produce a similar sort of stress response. And it can be a number of different things. So when you add in antioxidants, what they do is kind of hamper your ability to create that beneficial adaptation. So it's not really surprising that study, that review, found that to be the case, because physiologically it seems quite clear that you need a certain amount of stress to promote longevity and health, especially the mitochondrial health, which is what keeps you going into old age. So I think certainly all the literature I've seen really agrees with that. And practically, if you lift some weights, if you maintain mitochondrial health either through periods of calorie restriction, or even, there's some argument that you can do this with a low carb diet, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, then, you're going to be fine. It's just, if you're constantly stressed out, if you're overtraining all the time, or equally if you're never introducing any stress at all, then, you're probably going to die, basically.
Yeah, on a long enough timeline, the survival rate is 0.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this again, I'll probably be the guy that comes in with common themes all of the time. But when you look at two viewpoints, you get one extreme one end, one extreme the other end. Truth's probably in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
It's never, extremes don't generally bear out in the world.
See that time with supplements especially.
Certainly, like kind of what we spoke about before, with the fitness and health industry being big on dichotomy and big on standing out, and it's easy to stand out if you're the guy who pushes this mentally, than it is if you're the guy who says follow a calorie constricted diet, everything in moderation, do what the government says. But which you'll find out that advice is probably not too far away from what you need to be doing.
Yeah, crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy it is. However, hundreds of experts have come up with that advice. So the next topic on the news section is Ben, so I'll let you speak away.
Yeah, so I've kind of been thinking a lot about the R.P.E scale and how to integrate that into the training and diet aspects of what I do with clients and myself. So R.P.E meaning rate of perceived effort or rate of perceived exertion, and so I've had a lot of success lately just by introducing R.P.E to my clients' training programs and my own, and getting away from the fixed percentage kind of approach to lifting, which has its place in training, because I'm certainly not going to say that there's no need to ever specify weights or percentages when dealing with athletes or any sort of competitive lifting, but with ordinary people, especially intermediates, I think the R.P.E scale works incredibly well, because it's a way of getting people to focus more on being mindful of their own training, understanding their own limits a bit better, and pushing themselves when they need to and dialing back when they need to. And I think this has been one of the big revelations for me in the last few months, is realizing that even total beginners to weightlifting can make some great progress if they just listen to their body and just go by R.P.E and push themselves more than they would have done if they'd just sat down and worked out what their 1 rep max was using some spreadsheet.
Yeah, so on this, just to clarify some points, R.P.E stands for rate of perceived exertion. It's a scale used in sports science that determines how hard something was. So if you give something 10, it's maximal. So if it was a lactic acid training session, if you give it 10, you should be puking. If you're not puking, it's not 10. And 0 is pretty much rest. So this kind of idea, although not completely his, is championed a lot by a guy called Mike Tushner.
Yeah.
And he runs a website and training system called Reactive Training Systems. And so I think what quite a lot of people don't really grasp is Mike used Muscle Lab, which uses a dynamometer which you attach to the barbell, and it detects the change in speed and force output. So you give it the weight, and it'll work out the force output, rate of force development, and more importantly for what Mike does, it works out the velocity of the barbell. So he kind of quantified in a way, like in a 10 on a squat, a 9 on a squat, an 8 in a squat, you'd be moving within these ranges.
Yeah.
So he actually has like a quantification of what he does within that system. And I would encourage anyone highly to go read his stuff. He's a very intelligent man, extremely strong lifter, and I believe to be natural and lifting incredible weights for a natural. Just to kind of, within the 120 class, Mike has squatted, I believe, by 350 or 360 raw. He's bench pressed 230 raw, and he has deadlifted 365 or 370 raw. And as a 120 kilo lifter within the IPF, which is a drug tested federation, and it's someone who I've been around training for quite a long time, so I have a decent idea anyway of picking out like trends, people who are natural, trends who are not natural. And it's not to say I can pick them out, it's just I have a bit of a understanding. I believe Mike to be natural, like truly, which makes him probably one of the strongest natural lifters on the planet at the minute. So it's obviously, and he's produced great results with many athletes, powerlifting athletes, so it's obviously a very good system. And obviously Ben's having great success with it and his clients. So what are some of the aspects of the training that you like, Ben, that kind of worked for you in a bodybuilding standpoint?
Well, yeah, so just, yeah, getting away even from the whole strength training aspect, yeah, just in terms of, training for aesthetics or training for muscle mass, I like R.P.E because typically when you're training just for hypertrophy, you're always going to go for something in, the 8 to 12 rep range is pretty standard. And, when you actually select weights to use for your working sets, the R.P.E scale works nicely because instead of saying, okay, I'm going to work out what my 12 rep max is for, tricep extensions and then go in and, do a percentage of that. You just say, well, okay, on the day, do I feel like I could get a couple more reps with that set? Okay, I can. So that's an R.P.E of 8 probably. And if you're targeting an R.P.E of 9, you know that you probably need to go a tiny bit heavier to hit that. And in terms of the actual benefits of doing that, I find that staying around an R.P.E of 9 or just shy of a 10 introduces enough stimulus for muscle growth and strength gain, but it doesn't introduce so much fatigue that you under recover. So the idea really is to train to get as much volume in as possible and stop just as you're getting to the stage where you're introducing a lot of fatigue. So it's a similar idea to what you've probably seen if you've ever read about myo reps, which are like an extended set or a cluster set, where you try and stay just short of failure. So you maintain the greatest activation of motor units possible without introducing the sort of systemic fatigue of going to failure. So that's the idea that I try and implement with my training, and in practice it works quite nicely for strength and hypertrophy.
Yeah, it's certainly a training system that I've not actually used myself or with any of my athletes or clients. Although I can see that it is massively fruitful for the people who do use it. But from my perspective, where R.P.Es, just from hearing you talk, it seems that it allows people to understand the training process a little bit better.
Yeah.
So you understand that what is a maximal effort.
Yeah.
I find one of the biggest kind of things that I bring to the table is that when I come into like a group of athletes or I come in with a client, often they don't really know what a maximal effort is in terms of strength. They won't know what actual like a maximal 10 feels like. They won't know what like a maximal 5 feels like, because people always tend to err on the side of caution.
Yeah, exactly.
So they'll have novices, intermediates. So a guy who'll be training for like 3 months with a 150 squat, they'll have him doing like 3 sets of 5 using a percentage approach. So what you'll tend to find, if you train for a long enough time, you'll find that you can get strong just by going as heavy as possible or going for as many reps as possible every week on quite a long timeline. I did it myself probably for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Alistair, one of my lifters who may be listening, hello Alistair, he's kind of trains himself now. He would use that training for about 8 years, and he got up to 320 kilo squat for any Americans lifting at 700 pounds, 200 kilo bench press, 440 pounds, and a 340 or 330 deadlift. But he's version on 340, so like a 725, 750 deadlift. And he's a 21-year-old kid, 22 now. So like I know I could ream off like 20, 30 lifters who have done that process for about 4 or 5 years. But like you're saying with the fatigue, what I'm finding in my current training is that if I can do the big set, like this morning I did 200 kilos for 5 sets of 5 on the back squat. Like I could have done a set of 10 or 12 on it, but what happened is I would have broke down with fatigue and would have started like shifting off. Like I've got a bit of a shift in my squat, so I would have started favoring the strong hip, and I would have broke down. So kind of what I'm coming towards is more of like a multi-set approach and more frequency, and something like R.P.E or the Reactive training system is based on that sort of principle. It's quite useful.
Yeah, well, that's exactly. Well, yeah, I think it keeps you honest as well, because I found that when I do something which focuses on high frequency style of training, like I gave the sort of Bulgarian style lifting a try recently, and in 6 weeks I went from I'd had an extended layoff before this, so just to put it in perspective, a lot of those strength gains won't necessarily be, muscle or whatever. It was probably a lot of neural gains. But after having a bit of a layoff, I started training incline bench 3 times a week, and I was working up to not an actual 1 rep max, but like what you'd call a daily max, which is probably like an R.P.E of 9 in practice, or maybe a 9.5. Not quite maximal effort, but kind of the heaviest weight that you can lift without really grinding the weight. So again, it's going back to what you said about the bar speed earlier. And I got up to an incline bench of 125 for a single, which for me was pretty good. And that was in a 6-week period, having started off the cycle at around 100, which admittedly wasn't my max before, but it was where I was at the time. And what I found was that going by that R.P.E scale, on days when I felt like complete crap and I dragged myself into train, being honest with myself, if I'd gone by how I felt before going in the gym, I would have cut things short, or I maybe wouldn't have gone for a PB. But there were some weeks where I set a PB, 2 or 3 times that week when I felt like absolute crap. And just going by the R.P.E scale and the bar speed, I forced myself to just be more objective and say, okay, today I'm actually pretty strong. And if I'd gone in with fixed percentages and just done the work and left, I probably wouldn't have pushed myself as hard.
Yeah, again, coming from my perspective, something like an R.P.E would work for me in the opposite way, as it would stop me from pushing to the point where I get fucked up.
Yeah.
So you tend to get different kind of personalities and different kind of people that come to lifting, and I tend to deal, well, certainly within strength sports, you'll deal with the sort of overly zealous lifters who want to push, who want to push, and who want to push. I think R.P.E and also percentage-based lifting. I think percentage-based lifting is extremely useful if you've reached the point where you're close to as strong as you're going to get.
Yeah, definitely.
Because at the end of the day, if you have a 1RM of this, there's a certain amount of workload or a certain amount of progression that you need to engage with to up that level of fitness. So something like an R.P.E, it works. It obviously works where Mike Suchner is far stronger than me and far better than me. But where I would kind of, I don't know, I'm much more at home with the kind of periods of training, like 12 weeks towards a goal, and these are the workouts I need to complete, and this is how I get from A to B. Sort of training that Ed Coe and Kurt Kowalski, pretty much any powerlifter really does. I mean, Mike's pretty novel in this approach. So what I would say is, although it's a very good training system, it's certainly not the only way to skin the cat.
Oh, definitely. And I think, again, just going back to what you said, I think linear progression pretty much is, it works, and it's one of the best ways of getting stronger and bigger. I think the only reason I quite like R.P.E is because, in general, it tends to work out as the same thing. Like in general, if you follow R.P.E and you really listen to yourself, you're probably going to just be doing linear progression anyway. Yeah. It's just on those weeks when you probably need to dial back a bit, it can keep you honest, although like you said, in your case, it might work the other way.
Yeah, stop me from dialing up too much. Okay, so I'll move on to my bit. Trying to make it quite so long. So there's a book I read. It was a psychology book. Very useful, very interesting. And the name of the book was The Chimp Paradox. And it was produced by Dr. Steve Peters, who was a psychiatrist, but he ended up working with the British cycling team. So he basically in the book he puts across that he has a theory of mind. It's not massively detailed. If you go on, I shall link the URL in the show notes so you can come and have a look at kind of what it's all about. But basically, the crux of his theory is there's 3 kind of actors within your brain. There's the chimp, which is your irrational brain, so it's kind of your reptile brain, or just slightly above your reptile brain. And it's basically your emotional centers. So when something annoys you and you fight or flight, then you get angry and you're uncontrollable, that's your chimp. So that's your emotional brain taking over. And when it takes over, your the other part of your brain, which is called the human. So that's basically your cerebral cortex. That's your rational aspect of the brain. And that's kind of the bit of the brain that works from day to day life when you're kind of in a settled state. And that's basically your personality most of the time. So he almost treats it like a kind of two brains. Like there's a like a Mark chimp and there's Mark. So like when I'm like irrational, uncontrollable, like crying uncontrollably or angry as hell, or like any kind of any kind of situation you've been in where you've not been in control or you've done something stupid and later you completely regretted it, that was your chimp taking over. And then there's the computer, and the computer is basically your hardwired subconscious. And so the way he in the book he says the computer acts 10 times faster than the chimp, and the chimp acts 2 times faster than the human. So basically the book kind of lays out, for the first kind of third or half of the book, lays out this kind of theory of mind, how it works, how the various different things piece together, and then it's full of coping strategies with how to do this. This has been used like on his website here. He's got couple of quotes from Chris Hoy, the Mind program that helped me win my gold medals, Victoria Pendleton, Steve Peters is the most important person in my career. Like from talking from some people who have worked or either read the book, worked with some athletes who are fairly emotional, or have talked to some athletes he's worked with. I think where it comes into play is some people have issues where they can't really control their emotional brain. So you'll know some people who are fly off the handle really quickly. They're extremely kind of confrontational, aggressive, or they don't deal with pressure well, or they kind of break down. It gives those kinds of people like really useful tools that they can actually bring into play. So one of the tools it uses is called exercising your chimp. So let's say at work someone does something that pisses you off. So in the book, Steve recommends, rather than doing something stupid at work, you go to someone you trust, and for 10 minutes you just rant. Don't have them just have an audience. Rant at them, get everything off your chest, and then after about roughly 10 minutes, you'll feel much better about the situation, and your chimp will go back in his box. I don't know if it's really something we can discuss too much since you've not read it, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I'll just dismiss that out of hand. Yeah. No, that sounds interesting because I'm a little bit familiar with the whole nervous system having different structures. You know, some of them sort of going back to sort of reptilian, or sort of the evolution of the nervous system basically is quite, the human brain is built up from various systems, some of which are, very old, and then some of them are newer, I guess. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of that there's sort of different components to the way we think, and that the brain itself has got some, elements which are, go back to, reptiles, and some of the structures are newer, in the mammals, and I guess I can see that there would be that sort of difference in response coming out of the structures like that. But I guess that is interesting because I can see that in different people I know. I can think of examples of those sorts of different responders. And I guess stress response is a huge thing. I don't know if that was one of the things he touched on in the book, but I think the way you handle stress in general is got huge implications for health, as well as the way you train. So I'd be interested to have a read of that book, actually.
Just for my own part, it's an extremely useful book. It's not really one that I found useful as like something that I took like take home lessons from that I could use in a day-to-day sense, but it's certainly one that kind of elucidates quite a lot of things in people's kind of psychology, how they work, and I really encourage people, if you do read around areas, to kind of read around psychology, because it does give you like more of an insight into how people work and why people do certain things. Certainly I'll be bringing up quite a lot of that in future when we go to this topic. But definitely check it out, like, great book. Okay, so we're going to move on to the main topic, which we'll have about 20 minutes for. We'll try to keep the show to about an hour, not too much more. So we're going to go on to a topic that came out in Reddit on Monday. It was Sunday even, I think. It's basically a study. I'll try to find it. A study entitled Nutrition and Health, the Association Between Eating Behaviors and Various Health Parameters, a matched sample study. I think Ben's probably looked into this a bit more than I have, so if you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, so the first thing you've got to say, I guess, is, it's a cross-sectional study. So with all of this, with all of these cross-sectional studies, you've got to remember that it's difficult to nail down whether or not, you have causal factors, causal relationships, or whether or not there's just association. So, if someone is vegetarian and they happen to have poor health, you don't know if it's the dietary habits, or, maybe they actually, consume a vegetarian or vegan diet because they're unhealthy and they think that will, ameliorate their symptoms. So, that is one of the things I would say, just to take any results you get from studies like this with a pinch of salt. But basically, they did this cross-sectional study, and they found that vegetarians tend to have a lower BMI, they consumed alcohol less frequently, which I guess you can again tie in with the idea that vegetarians are probably more health conscious, and so a lot of the reason for following that diet is maybe because of existing health issues. But the key thing that they found was that a vegetarian diet was associated with poorer health, and specifically higher incidences of cancer, allergies, mental health disorders. So, it didn't look very good if if you're vegetarian.
I think, just to kind of put a bit of some numbers on it, I'm just kind of looking at the table of results here. So for the statistically significant factors, the first one's allergies, and vegetarians were 30.6% as sufferers. Carnivorous diet rich in fruits and vegetables, 18.2%, so an order of 12% less. Carnivorous diet rich in meat, not so rich in meat and vegetables, was 20.3%. And again, carnivorous diet rich in meat, or diet less rich in meat, sorry, was the last one, 20%. And carnivorous diet rich in meat was 16.7%. So I think at least 10% less likely to be allergenic, but then that could be maybe people who have allergies could be lactose intolerant. They could quite a lot of animal products cause allergies in people, so that's probably to be expected. Urinary incontinence, vegetarian 2.1%, and meat eaters were on the whole more likely, with diet rich in fruit and vegetables, carnivorous 4%, carnivorous diet rich in meat, or less rich in meat 2.7%, and carnivorous diet rich in meat 6.4%. So again, that can maybe be related to the protein content of the diet, maybe having some effect on kidney function, which gets banded about loads, and I'm sure we'll come across at some stage. Cancer, pretty much 5% vegetarian, 3.3% in carnivorous diet rich in fruit and vegetables, 1.2% rich in meat, and carnivorous diet rich in meat 1.8%. So that's quite an interesting statistic. Both diets that were higher in fruits and vegetables, namely the vegetarian and carnivorous diet rich in fruit and vegetables, actually had much higher prevalence of cancer within them. So that's quite interesting. Mental illness, vegetarian 9.4%, carnivorous diet rich in fruit and vegetables 4.8%, carnivorous diet rich in meat 5.8%, and carnivorous diet rich in meat 4.5%. So I'll kind of fuck that up a little bit. Anytime I mentioned carnivorous diet rich in meat was meant to be diet less rich in meat. So I think some interesting discussion points there. Certainly, maybe if we begin with the urinary incontinence one, and kind of your take on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would have picked up a few things, I guess, from this, but it's just, for me, I guess the issue I have with all of these studies in general, is being cross-sectional. Do we know that, the vegetarian diet was the cause of that problem? Or again, is it that someone who is health conscious because they're suffering with something like that, they look for, a solution in terms of diet? So for instance, they start eating a low protein diet, or, they eat a vegetarian diet to try and ameliorate the symptoms. So, that would be my first sort of question.
So I think you would struggle looking at dietary and nutritional literature to come out with any kind of causation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that, for me, is what kind of negates the process of nutrition and dietary science.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult to look at. If you try to look at it at a cellular level or a metabolic level, the complexity when you look at a system-wide, sort of when you look at the human body, how something interacts with it as a whole, when you talk about complexity, it really doesn't get any more complex than that. So I don't think the current science or the current nutritional science really isn't up to the task on that level. When you look at epidemiological studies such as this, I mean, it's only 1,320 people, which may sound like a lot, but in science that's practically nothing. When we were looking at basically habits, or basically we look at vegetarians versus carnivores, these are the trends, and then this correlates. But then when we get this correlative study, like Ben's saying, we can't really establish causation, so it's where we go from here, though, with nutrition is the problem. Do we take out a group of 5,000 people, another group of 5,000 people, and just control everything in their life and change their diet and see how it pans out for the rest of their life? I mean, if you're looking at like a methodology, if this is a methodological problem, you need a large enough population. So for something like this, you're probably talking thousands of people. You're looking to control extrinsic factors, so you're looking to control their dietary intake, their day-to-day life. You're asking too much, really. So it's really quite a difficult, it's quite a hard task to ask of, scientific excellence in this field.
Yeah.
I think that's where it falls down quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of these studies I've seen, a bit like that infamous protein study, in terms of the way they've been done, the methodology was pretty sound, the statistical analysis was all right. No real technical issues. It's just making conclusions from that is always going to be suspect for a number of different reasons. But I mean, one thing I find interesting about this is if you look at that figure in table 3, the incidence of mental illness, specifically anxiety and depression, was much higher in the vegetarian sample. So the thing that I would kind of again, this would be pretty tenuous as well to even make this lead, but you could even, suppose that someone who had a lot of anxiety about food or had a lot of, problems associated with the way they eat, the food anxiety is a huge issue. You could argue that perhaps they would be leaning more towards a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet simply because they had an existing issue, not that a vegetarian diet necessarily promoted anxiety.
Apart from an aversion to taste, but that's a separate issue. Again, I think when you look at, coming back to spectrums, when you look at any kind of extreme or any kind of niche dietary practice, you're probably dealing with a different sort of psychology. Like someone who chooses to be like a strict vegan over someone who just eats what everyone else eats, you're talking about different psychologies completely.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's such a multifactorial problem as they tease out what causes someone to be a vegetarian or what causes someone to be a strict vegan. It's not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I mean, maybe it's a genetic thing, maybe it's a gay thing. I mean, gay people are biologically wired to be that way. So maybe vegetarians are biologically wired to be that way. Oh, but like seriously though, I mean, maybe some people have an aversion to killing animals. I mean, when you talk about like what we do biologically is we divulge into different areas. So mutation and like variety and survival and like like frequencies within the population and survival of frequencies is what causes evolution.
Yeah.
So since we're basically not subject to evolution anymore, things such as homosexuality are much more prevalent. Like they're probably at much higher percentages than they would be if we were like tigers or lions. They still exist within those kind of species, but like probably I don't know if I'm talking shit or not, but I'd be willing to bet there'd be lesser frequencies than they are in kind of a diet where we don't die off. Well, at least in the Western culture, we don't die off because of reasons of starvation. We don't die off because of war. We don't die off because of natural predators. So I don't know. I'm probably going off too much of a tangent here, but
no, I mean you're right. I guess epigenetics comes into play. We're a combination of genetics and environment. So yeah, I guess you're right. There might well be some sort of genetic factor in terms of what sort of diet people eat. I guess I mean what I found interesting as well was that only 2.2% of all of the participants in this study actually consumed a vegetarian diet. So it's kind of, even taking 1,000 people like you were saying, it's actually quite a small number of them were actually vegetarians. So again, you could argue that if you did this study on a larger scale, a lot of these things might even out and you might not see the same sort of difference in terms of, health issues. So
that's kind of the reason why this kind of study needs to be done with such large numbers when you do an epidemiological study such as this. It's like when we looked at the Cochrane study, they had 450,000 people, and we're talking about 1,000 people here. So it's like, say we got our pool of vegetarians from an old person's home.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like we're talking like 1% of 1,320. You do the math on that.
Yeah.
I'll
have to get my calculator out, but yeah, I'll assume that that's a low number. Yeah.
So we're talking about 26 people. I mean, like that's realistically, they could have went and got 26 old people who were vegetarians, and that was their sample. And a study like this, I don't know if they kind of went for a homogeneous population where they went for healthy adults between 20 and 30. Typically, that's what they would do. But yeah, so like that's why these studies need to be done on a larger scale. And there's not really anything meaningful that we can really bring out of this study.
Yeah, well, it's just funny to bash vegetarians at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, morons. I mean, come on. I mean, of course you're not morons. Don't send me a hate mail.
Yeah, well, I mean they are, but yeah, you're right, they're not. But no, I guess what I found interesting as well was when you don't control things like caloric intake, it's going to be really ropey talking about any sort of condition.
Yeah, of course.
You're going to be affected by that. And I guess you could even, if you took this to an extreme, you could look at comparing people who eat a low sodium diet with ones who don't, and then talk about various different health conditions, and you might find out that people who ate a low sodium diet had chronic hypertension, and you could say, oh well, that's because they eat too little sodium, but of course that would be nonsense because they probably eat a low sodium diet because they've already got chronic hypertension. So yeah, I think basically all we're saying is this study's nonsense, and
pretty much, but it does make great cannon fodder.
Yeah, definitely. I think the problem is that people take these things and they use them, to support whatever view they want. So if you're really anti-vegetarian, you're just going to say this is proof that all vegetarians have got are mentally ill and going to suffer health problems. And if you're a vegetarian, you're just going to rip it to bits and say, well, look at the people who eat all the red meat. They've clearly got health problems too, and it just doesn't give you anything productive, like you said, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and again, going back to psychology, this is kind of it's known as a confirmation bias. So someone like me or Ben who like to lift weights, or we like to lift weights in a certain way, we might look at a study that says, oh, that backs up my idea, so I'm correct. Whereas we looked at something that was contradictory to our viewpoint, we'd probably go, yeah, I'm not too sure about this study. Let's delve into the problems, into the methodology. So everyone's got biases. There's some really good books that we'll discuss going forward that have some great things to say on these things.
Yep. So I guess we can do the Q&A section now, seeing as we don't have to.
Yeah. So to the question and answer section.
Beard care. I got a few questions on how to maintain, a plush-looking beard.
Shoot away, as a former owner of a beautiful beard, I have unfortunately been strucken down by the razor of death.
Yeah, I wish I could grow one, but I'm not obviously not a real man. So
you need more tests, bruh.
And I do, yes, that's what.
You need to supplement some vitamin T and some mineral S.
Yes, and some creatine.
Never, not even once, bruh. So I guess that pretty much wraps up the show. So hopefully going forward we'll be a bit more structured, we'll be a bit more plush, but this is kind of our first toe in the water. Any questions or queries you may have for the show, send them for now to speedpowerperformance@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. I'm R.P.E signing off.
Yep, and I'm Ben Tormey signing off as well. Have a great day.
Have a great week. Be awesome at everything. Goodbye.